Welcome to the Teachers on Fire podcast, where 21st century educators come to share, learn, and be inspired. We believe in the growth mindset, creativity, communication, critical thinking, collaboration, and strategic uses of education technology. Our mission is to share news and views from teachers who are crushing it in the classroom and making a difference for learners everywhere. I'm your host, Tim Cavey. Let's jump into today's episode. Today, I'm speaking with Jarrod Dumas. Jarrod is an assistant principal at Oak Hill Middle School in the state of Maine. He's a former social studies teacher and the author of Unlocking Excellence, a guide to becoming an extraordinary educator. Jarrod, thanks so much for coming on the show today. Are you ready to talk education?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's my pleasure. I love the book and I love your message, love what you're all about. Let's jump into this by telling a little bit more about your current context in education.
Sure. So as you said, I was a social studies teacher for 10 years, but right now I'm an assistant principal of a 6-8 middle school and a pre-K to 2 elementary school, actually, but I'm mostly at a middle school in Sabattus, Maine, called Oak Hill Middle School. Basically, I handle discipline and I manage attendance, truancy, which are traditional assistant principal roles, but I also evaluate staff, making sure that they're implementing best practices in instruction and in management. I think basically in a really broad way, I spend a lot of time coaching kids, making sure that they're making good choices, helping them maintain like a growth mindset and kind of understanding their own patterns of behavior and trying to help them become self-aware so they can become more mindful and make positive decisions. It's kind of that, teach a man to fish philosophy, helping them see why they may be struggling sometimes and how to kind of get out of that. And I think, honestly, I'm doing a lot of that work with educators as well, because education is changing really fast. Sometimes it's changing so fast that teachers are having a hard time always being their best selves while they adapt to the changing education climate. So I'm really working with them to help them, which will hopefully help our students as well.
Well, that's a great package, Jarrod. I hear a lot about coaching and mentorship there, both of staff and of students. Flipping through your book a little bit, you've got so many great practical stories and anecdotes that illustrate your message and what you're all about. And we're going to get to those in a few minutes. But first of all, take us to a place in your educational career that was a bit of a low point where you faced some adversity, and tell us about how you worked through that experience and what you learned from it.
So I actually do talk about this in the book. I was teaching few years back now. It's probably 5 or 6 years ago. And so I was supposed to be starting class, but it was one of those mornings where I was behind. And I think teachers have kind of been in this position before. So first period of the day, I didn't have all my copies ready, kind of behind the 8 ball, right? So of course, not giving the kids something to do right off the bat, they kind of fall into these patterns that we would see high school students fall into, and they're playing browser games on their iPads, and it's just kind of like a teacher's worst nightmare, So I was getting a little frustrated with them when I should have been more frustrated with myself. There's this one boy in the front. He's got some kind of role-playing game going, and I kind of got sarcastic. I said, did your mage have enough power to drain his mana? And he just kind of looked at me with this very hurt, very embarrassed look. I knew right away that I'd screwed up. And he just says, well, if you'd get off your ass and teach us something, I wouldn't be playing these games, would I? And he was absolutely right. But it was a terrible, terrible moment because I've got to take him to the office now, even though I know he's right and I'm wrong because he says this in front of 15 kids. So it was just like one of those low moments where you're like, this is not good all around. But, the way I turned it around and overcame that particular moment, got into the principal's office. The 3 of us are in there. My boss, this student, and myself closed the door. And I just told my principal flat out, I said, you know what? I screwed up. I called this kid out in front of his peers. He got frustrated. This is what he said. I honestly don't blame him. It's my fault because I wasn't ready for class. And I embarrassed him. And I apologized to the student right in front of my principal. He apologized to me for calling me names, or for using the language he did. We shook hands, we moved on, and always had a great relationship after that. And I think just sometimes it's important for us to to be mindful and honest about where we're at. Like if we drop the ball, then own it, and move forward and learn from it. So what that moment did for me helped me spend time going forward in my career. I'll never forget that moment. Now I plan ahead and I kind of try to know, look, these things are going to come up, these things are going to happen. But I have to always be responsible and accountable for my choices. And that mindfulness piece of not losing your cool in the moment. And if something goes wrong, just being honest about it and owning it. I could have told the kids, look, I should have had this done. I didn't. Let's get going on a writing prompt while I finish my work, something like that. So that was a low moment, but it taught me a ton.
Wow, I can really see myself there in that story. And I think a lot of teachers have lived through that moment at one time or another. We hear all the time, don't resort to sarcasm, right? It never turns out well, but it certainly does come easily sometimes, right? It is so tempting to go there. One thing I take from your story is that you really owned it. You addressed the fact that you dropped the ball. Obviously, as you said, the students' language did need to be addressed as well, but what a good modeling experience for him to see you apologize and take responsibility for your own actions.
Well, kids need authenticity from their educators. And I think, there are a lot of I'm not the first person to think of this. I mean, in a lot of ways, school has to be more like real life. And if we as teachers just could express ourselves and be ourselves and let kids see us as who we are and not, the concept of the game of school, right? Like we play this game of school. It's like a persona we wear. And just because I'm the teacher doesn't mean I'm always right. I've had moments with my students, and some people would cringe when they hear this. Like I've had days where I come into class and say, boy, guys, I got some work I need to get done. Or I'm really not feeling this particular lesson today. Let's do something a little bit different, or in the moment, if your lesson's bombing, calling a timeout and say, let's do something different. Let them see that you're a real person, because they know when your lesson sucks, they know when it's not good. So being authentic with them buys you a lot of credibility with kids. And I think that's a huge thing for teachers to run with,
Well, you mentioned growth mindset, Jarrod, and it sounds like you embody it well, both for your students and for your staff. That is so refreshing. I mean, if you were coaching me as a teacher, just to hear you share those kinds of anecdotes, I think can't help but build trust, right? Those walls can't help but come down, and we are reminded that we're all failing forward, hopefully. We're taking the feedback from those failures, and we're all learning and improving and growing as a learning community. We're certainly not infallible, right?
That's true. And that's why that story about that young man, actually, I start my book with that, because I want people to know, just because I've written a book about how to become better at what you do doesn't mean I'm perfect, because we've all been there. And I think building trust with staff and having them know that you understand what it's like to be them goes a long, long way. Yeah.
Well, let's move into the book, shall we? Again, it's called Unlocking Excellence, A Guide to Becoming an Extraordinary Educator. That's a beckoning title, Jarrod. There's a lot of promise there. So tell us about the heart and main message of the book. Why did you write the book? And I know you've gotten into this a little bit already, but what do you want educators to take away from this book?
Sure. So, the idea for the book kind of came from 10 years in the classroom and 3 years working as an administrator. And I saw a need for teachers to kind of get back to the roots of education. There's so many things that are changing so fast. And the phrase I use is a lot of practitioners are kind of experiencing this pedagogical whiplash, like with proficiency-based learning and asynchronous learning and the flipped classroom and everything. Like, it's easy to kind of forget that there are basic things about teaching that work really well. And so I wanted to, in the book, I talk about specific classroom instruction strategies and management strategies that have worked really well for me, that are not novel again, but they're fundamental to teaching. But I go beyond that, and I really wanted to help teachers by talking about mindset and their personal mindset and the choices they make. And the phrase you used earlier is one of my favorites, is owning your profession. Like, it's not easy to be a teacher. And I know that we all experience it, but you get to choose whether you're going to be a great teacher or not. And there are so many things beyond our control. And I feel the same way as an administrator. I mean, I'm not in the classroom anymore, but trust me, there are a lot of things about my job I can't control. We don't choose our students. We don't choose our parents. We don't choose, in a lot of cases, the budget that we set. We don't choose our class. There's a lot of things we can't choose, but we can choose to say, you know what, if I'm going to do this job, then I'm going to bring my best every day. And part of my book is, building sharing some techniques that I use in my life to make my day as powerful as I can, like make my day the best day possible. And that's everything from taking care of my body and, journaling, even meditating to how I choose once I get to work, being mindful, the way I avoid certain things or the way I choose to focus on other things. Everything about whether you love your job or not, whether you're great at your job, whether you are a positive influence on kids is really your choice. So there's a lot of books on instruction. There's a lot of books on management, but I do really try to talk a lot about mindset and how you can choose to be the best teacher that you can.
And it's not an overwhelming read, right, Jarrod? I mean, you've divided the book into 3 main sections: mindset, instruction, and management. And this is not the kind of book that is going to take some teacher 3 months to get through.
So absolutely. I've read enough books, been asked to read enough books in my career that you pick up and you get to the second or third page and you want to put it down because it's so technical, or it's like really dense. And it's like, I didn't want something like that. That's not what matters. What I did was create a book. It's probably, in print version, it'd probably be about 100 pages, but it reads really quick. You can read it in a couple hours, and it's meant to be light, and it's meant to be a little bit humorous, and it's meant to be relatable and actionable. There is a lot of stuff in there that you can read and you can take away from it, a lot of ideas that you can use right off the bat. It's not dense. It's meant to be something that teachers will enjoy and get some ideas from. So that was the goal, was something that would be useful and enjoyable for teachers to read.
Well, Jarrod, it sounds and looks like the book will be both useful and enjoyable for educators. I think it's a great read from what I've seen so far. We've talked about the fact that there's a lot changing in education today, but talk to us about what you're excited about. What's really fueling your passion for education today?
So I think a lot of the things that are difficult and can be challenging are also some of the most exciting things. There is a great opportunity to shift the paradigm if we can all kind of get excited and get on the same page about where we're going in education. The promise of technology and the ability to bring the outside world into the classroom really does give us a great opportunity to make connections, to kind of marry like real world problem solving with the fact that our kids need to demonstrate mastery of standards or content, or however you choose to measure it, whether it's essential knowledge or whatever. So I think that's what really gets me excited. The promise that we can maybe get parents, administrators, staff, students, all, learning to be accountable and responsible for their piece of the puzzle, because it's so easy for all of us to say, well, if this isn't working, it's because this group isn't quite pulling their weight, or that person isn't making sure their child does their homework at night, or whatever, and we pass blame around. But if we could all say, look, we're all going to get together, do our part, we can make this work. And that's what excites me, thinking that there's really literally nothing we can't sort out if we're all pulling together.
That's an amazing vision, Jarrod. Really appreciate that. Now, the term lifelong learner. We're all there as educators, both teachers and administrators. So talk to us about something that is fueling your passion outside of the school, something that is really capturing your interest in personal learning outside of your work situation.
Sure. Actually, pretty recently, I kind of fell down this big rabbit hole on Jungian philosophy and Carl Jung's works around archetypes. I've kind of been obsessed with it lately, actually, and I'm interested in it because it gives me a new lens through which to view myself. I'm always trying to make myself better. I really try to kind of walk the walk. I'm not just talking about this. It's been a big journey for me, trying to become a better person, to grow as a human and expand my own knowledge and skills. And I'm 40 years old. I just kind of got introduced to Carl Jung, which I'm a little bit embarrassed to say because he's obviously someone who's been around for a long time, and his ideas are not new. But for me, just this idea of seeing patterns and images in our world, and how they fit into our own growth, and how we can use his ideas about these different archetypes, like the warrior or the hero or the king, to kind of become a better person and to try and grow as an individual. It's just something that's really been keeping me interested lately. There is one book that I would probably recommend, that's a pretty easy read. It's called King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, by Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. It's a little bit older, but the idea is that we have these archetypes in our lives, and I like this one particularly because it seems to highlight these four particular archetypes, or these kind of images of an ideal aspect of our personality that we can choose to embody. And just the idea of archetypes and what they are, they explain it pretty well in the book. It's probably a little tricky because I'm not going into much detail. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you are probably no more educated now than when I started talking. But it's a fascinating idea. It's almost something you would enjoy kind of digging into on your own. So
I think there's certainly a lot to be said for unlocking the psychology around the type of person that you are, the archetype that you fit into, and just getting a better sense of the person that you are. Would you agree?
Yes, exactly. The promise of the archetype for me right now, this idea that we have archetypes are essentially psychic organs. Okay, there are a lot of people who think Jung's ideas are complete bunk, and I'll just say that. But that we have these psychic organs that kind of regulate our mind and kind of drive us towards certain patterns that we see throughout human history, that we are meant to strive to meet our goals, that we're meant to strive to be compassionate with other people. And it's hardwired into our psyche, hardwired into our brain. And so I'm fascinated by the idea that there is an overarching plan or overarching pattern for how we live out our lives, and that we're meant to be pushing forward and growing, like literally by design. I just find that a really interesting idea.
Well, that's very cool, Jarrod. We're going to move into the personal productivity space, and I'd love to hear about maybe a habit that helps you tick. I mean, I think of your role, you've got a lot of plates spinning, a lot of constituents to communicate with, whether it's staff, students, parents, or administrators above you. How do you make it all work, and what makes you tick? Is there something you do on the daily that really keeps you going and makes you effective?
Yeah, I think if I could point to one thing that's really helped me become successful, because I have not always been successful at this job, it's about as big a growth curve going from teacher to admin as it is becoming a teacher in the first place, maybe even more so. And one thing that's worked really well for me is just taking care of my body in terms of my personal fitness, exercising, eating right, moving my body before I go to work, even if it's just going for a 15-minute walk. This has helped me a lot. And it sounds simple. In some ways it is. It's one of those things that it's simple, not easy to take care of ourselves. But, my stress level, certainly education, whether you're an admin or a teacher, it can be very stressful, but my stress is gone. I have more energy. I'm better at my job because I'm calmer and I'm more energetic throughout the day. Just taking care of your body, taking time for yourself, I think, when you're not at school is huge. Whether it's before you leave or when you get home, taking care of yourself and giving yourself an opportunity to enjoy the fruits of working out or doing something relaxing with your family. As teachers, we take care of everybody else, but we don't always put our own oxygen mask on, and that's probably my one personal habit that's helped me the most.
Well, that's very well said, Jarrod, and I couldn't put it any better myself. I think, as educators, we are guilty sometimes. We don't even like to say that word guilty, but I think we're guilty of going very hard, perhaps too hard, in an effort to serve all of these parties in our work life and our personal life, and sometimes neglecting the machine that makes it all possible, that machine being our body. So I think we need to hear that encouragement and that challenge from time to time to get back to the basics of self-care. Take that time to exercise and look after our body to make sure that we are functioning in peak condition. We're going to shift gears now, Jarrod, and move into our lightning round, some rapid fire questions. So we're starting at Twitter, every educator's base for a solid PLN. Who would you point us to on Twitter? Who do we need to be following that perhaps we're not following right now?
Sure. I think you should definitely check out my friend Paul Stevens Fulbrook. He is a teacher from the UK. He's a science teacher. He has a great blog. He's on Twitter at Teacher of Sci1. So Teacher of SCI and the number 1. He's just getting going on Twitter, but he's got a great blog at his website, which is teacherofsci.com. He writes about best practices. He's got a great following, and we're actually kind of working on some online modules that we're going to try to make available for teachers around the holidays. So you guys should check him out.
All right, Teacher of Sci. I am familiar with him, and I follow him on Instagram. He's a lot of fun, and he posts a lot of pretty funny content. He definitely is one of these teachers that brings his subject area to life. So make sure you follow Teacher of Sci. Thank you for that one. And then next, Jarrod, point us to an edtech tool that you really appreciate using in your office or your day-to-day work, perhaps in your personal life, your personal productivity. What's really working for you in the edtech space?
Well, what I actually would highlight is, since I think most folks who are listening to this are probably teachers, I like tools like Socrative, even Kahoot's not bad, but tools that are going to engage students in the lesson and provide some real-time feedback to teachers. I think students have become so kind of game-oriented, right, or gamified, or they want everything to be an app. So, I think if that's where they're at, it's important to make the best of that. So maybe they don't want to write 5 minutes. Maybe they don't want to do a quick write with pen and paper, but let's give them an opportunity to engage in a way that's meaningful for them. Any tech tool that creates more student engagement with a lesson in the classroom gets my endorsement. So
I would agree with that as well, Jarrod, 100%. Next, we're moving into books. Now, we talked earlier about the rabbit hole that books can be, and we've all got these lists of books that we'd like to be reading, but is there one that you've read this summer that we really need to add to our book list, or perhaps one of your all-time faves that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, sure. I mentioned the book King, Warrior, Magician, Lover earlier. It's basically living up to the mature models that exist for us to emulate. It's a good book about personal development. One of my, I love reading the Sherlock Holmes stories. Actually, that's been one of my all-time favorites. I've gone through the complete series a few times, and I'm just fascinated by the way Sherlock Holmes thinks and the way that Doyle develops that character over time. And it's that's really fun. If you've never taken the time, it's one of those classics that's worth taking a peek at.
I like that pick. I mean, it's a little bit off the radar, shall we say, but I really appreciate the Sherlock Holmes mysteries as well. It sounds like I haven't read as many of them as you have, but it certainly is written in a fun style, and they give a kind of a neat throwback into another time in history, don't they?
A totally different time, but still very useful. And Sherlock Holmes as a character, and I almost would say as an archetype, has really enjoyed a comeback in the last 10 or 15 years. He's pretty popular right now. He's been depicted in more TV and film. I think he's got more TV and film appearances than any character, actually. I read that somewhere. It may be true.
Moving into podcasts, Jarrod, a lot of teachers and educators are starting a new commute this year. So tell us about a podcast that we need to add to our podcast deck that help those miles go a little bit faster and help us learn by the time we've gotten to school.
I definitely would recommend the Ask Gary Vee podcast. I don't know if you're familiar with Gary Vaynerchuk. He's entrepreneur, social media influencer, not necessarily directly related to education, but what I love about him is the way he pushes everybody he talks to, sometimes in a pretty vile way, but he pushes people to figure out what they're passionate about and to do that. Like, what should you be doing with your life? What do you love? What do you care about? What are you passionate about? Do that and just go at it hard. And so I really like that attitude. And that certainly, whether you're an educator or doing anything else for work, it definitely, is great advice.
He is definitely becoming a pretty influential, pretty important voice in that entrepreneurship creative space. So Gary Vee comes with a bit of a language warning, but Gary Vee is as intense and as motivating as they come. Next, Jarrod, take us into YouTube. Now, not every educator subscribes to YouTube channels. I'm trying to change that, trying to help teachers add some good channels to their list. But is there a channel that you appreciate that we should be subscribing to and taking note of today?
I would not say this is necessarily related to education, but Motivation Guru is a channel I follow. Basically, they make videos that are kind of a mashup of inspirational speakers. They lay an epic music track underneath it. I love listening to it when I work out or when I wake up, if I go for a walk or I'm trying to get ready for my day. It's just little clips of, sayings and phrases from people you're going to know that they get me really fired up for my day. It's actually part of like a daily practice that I do. So I would start with Motivation Guru and get yourself fired up in the morning.
And then last question, Jarrod. I mean, this one is completely off the education radar, right? But it is telling, it is fun. I think it gives a little bit of insight into the kind of person that you are, and it might give us some good ideas in terms of what to turn to. So talk to us about Netflix. What are you watching on Netflix right now?
I'm actually rewatching Peaky Blinders, which is I think we're up to season 4, and they're short seasons because it's a British series. But I love Tommy Shelby. I think in another life, maybe I was a gypsy gangster in early 20th century England or something like that. Just the way he is this black sheep character, but everybody turns to him to get the job done. It's a pretty interesting show. You should check it out.
All right. Thanks for that recommendation, Jarrod. Listen, this has been such a blast today to talk to you. How can people follow you and get to know your content just a little bit better online?
Sure. And I really appreciate the opportunity as well. Thank you for having me on. You can check me out on Twitter, Extraordinary247. So Extraordinary 24/7, spelled with an X, not an E. So Extraordinary 24/7. You can also check me out on my website, which is extraordinaryeducator.com. And I'm on Instagram, extraordinary_educator. Those are the 3 best places to see what I do.
All right, Jarrod, thanks again for that. And we will make sure to follow you online. Remember, make sure to take a look at Jarrod's book. It's called Unlocking Excellence, A Guide to Becoming an Extraordinary Educator. And I'll make sure the link to his book and everything else we've mentioned today appears in the show notes there at teachersonfire.net. Jarrod, thanks again so much for your time. Really appreciate your message, appreciate what you're doing for educators around the world. And as you get into this new school year, I just wish you nothing but the best. Have an amazing year.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time, and I'm excited to get into it, and hope you guys have a great school year as well.
All right. Take care, Jarrod.
You too, sir.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Teachers on Fire, where teachers come to share, learn, and be inspired. Please subscribe to the podcast, leave us a review on iTunes, and follow us on Twitter at Teachers on Fire. I'm your host, Tim Cavey, saying goodbye for now, and we'll catch you next time, right here on the Teachers on Fire podcast.